riots in 1992, otherwise known as the Rodney King riots. Without discussing the origins of this event, which are largely irrelevant to our purpose here, let's look at what happened on the ground. It started with the acquittal of the officers charged with assaulting Mr. King on April 29th, on a Wednesday, in Los Angeles. Because of the sensitivity of police actions and police behavior, a very unfortunate decision was made, which we've seen repeated recently in Ferguson and elsewhere, that police response to the initial outbreaks of violence was very, very muted and delayed. In Los Angeles, police did not respond effectively to any incident of violence for approximately 3 hours because they were afraid that police showing up on scene would aggravate the situation. On that first day alone, as you see here, 4 deaths, 100 reported injuries, probably several times that in reality. A citywide curfew was imposed. There was widespread arson and looting. We're going to talk a lot about Koreatown, but there were many districts of Los Angeles that experienced looting and arson and break-ins on businesses. After the looting and burning of many businesses around the city on the first night and second night of the riots, when police response was very slow or non-existent, the police were overextended and unable to respond to many, many calls. What we saw that was a relatively rare or unprecedented response in modern American history was that shopkeepers and families in the Koreatown district, who'd been heavily targeted in the previous 2 nights, armed themselves to defend life and property, to defend their homes and businesses. You see a couple images of photographs that were taken at the time. And for the next several days, these residents stood armed on the rooftops, inside the windows and doors of their businesses, sometimes on the streets. There were many, many, many reports during and after the riots that expressed outrage at the fact that police response was slow or non-existent. Tremendous damage was done, and police were able to show up. There were, as an aside, over 10,000 National Guard and active duty Army and Marine Corps troops deployed during these riots. And it wasn't until all of those people were on the streets and on duty on the 5th and 6th day that the violence began to subside. So the response of the system here. What you see on this slide is an extract from a New York Times story a few weeks after the riots concluded, where you see a manager of a gun shop in Koreatown said that when their business was attacked, LAPD units were present when the gunfire broke out, and the police vehicles withdrew. And as you see below, more than 200 people had converged on the mall where these shops were located. His sister and sister-in-law were attempting to flee the premises. They were both shot, engaged by gunfire out of the crowd of rioters, and several shootings and significant injuries on both sides in this encounter. This is one of the one of the largest scale incidents of civil unrest with widespread violence in recent history. But as most of you will remember, it certainly was not the last. We had in 1999 the World Trade Organization riots in Seattle, which were, unlike 1992 in Los Angeles, they were politically motivated, and they began as peaceful protests and rapidly disintegrated into random and uncontrolled violence. That was followed by a couple of days of rioting in Los Angeles immediately afterwards. We've seen considerable civil unrest in Ferguson, in Baltimore. See that this is part of what we would call the new normal in America. And the bullets you see on the current slide are unfortunately an accurate characterization of that situation. As we said earlier, law enforcement is often overwhelmed and unable to provide protection, and their response is often delayed and therefore ineffective. We also see that once violence and looting and property destruction begin, they follow no particular logic. As you see in cases like Ferguson, the violence, will be directed against businesses in the protesters' own neighborhoods, and wherever they move to, wherever they congregate. And even though the perpetrators of violence may be a minority of the people on the streets, it erupts, it moves, it flows, following rules that no one can really predict or understand. So what we're looking at Pulse now is the potential this summer for politically motivated violence, and in particular, we're going to focus in this series of webinars upon the Republican National Convention upcoming, which is, of course, not to say that political protests are of their nature criminal or violent, but as we saw in Seattle in 1999, even lawful, organized, and politically motivated peaceful protests can quickly get out of hand. And we've seen this already on a small scale at political rallies around the country during the ongoing presidential campaign. So let's jump now into a hypothetical scenario we constructed. First, I'll talk to you a little bit about the method seen here. This hypothetical scenario is derived from and presented in the manner of a tactical decision game, or a TDG. It's a training format that we use extensively at Pulse. It's a training tool that presents a snapshot in time, a decision point in a situation. The TDG describes the situation from the point of view of a participant, providing no more information than that participant's point of view would provide, and then asks the participant, the recipient of the training, to decide upon a course of action at that point of time in that situation, present that course of action, and explain it. Now, in this case, what we're going to do here today is we're going to walk through a narrative, a series of decisions made by a particular participant, all the way through to the resolution of the situation. If we were to pursue this in the form of an actual tactical decision game, we would zero in on any of the decision points in this narrative. So if you find yourself following through these slides in this narrative thinking, I wouldn't have done that at some point in the story I'm going to give you, then you're using the scenario the way it is intended, as a thought-provoking hypothetical narrative. At the end of it, I'm going to pass this off to Mr. Danielowski, who will then describe how our training can help to prepare any armed individual to confront the kinds of challenges that are illustrated here. So here's our situation. We're looking down on a portion of Cleveland, Ohio. Near the lower left corner of your screen, you'll see the Quicken Loans Arena, which is going to be the venue for the Republican National Convention. Our main character in this scenario is a 30-year-old male who works at the Arcade shopping mall. You see the tag on the sort of upper left corner, shopping mall near the convention district and the arena. He is, in fact, possessor of a handgun and a concealed carry permit. And on this day, Monday, the first day of the 2016 Republican National Convention, he leaves his home to go to work. His first decision was whether to continue in his daily routine during a period of uncertainty with the knowledge that there were going to be mass protests, in and around the city associated with the convention. But his choice was not to alter his normal routine. That at 7:30, 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, he thought that that there would be no reason why he couldn't drive his normal route and get to work without incident. So from his home in the southeastern suburbs to his job in the Arcade, he drives in on a freeway which is off this south. He exits a few blocks from the convention site. Traffic appears no more congested than usual until ahead of him he sees cars coming to a sudden stop. The ramp runs underneath the Inner Belt Freeway. See and what he sees as he looks ahead to that underpass is a dense crowd of pedestrians filling the interstate highway above. And he realizes that these are, in fact, a large, dense mass of protesters moving on the highway towards the convention site. Traffic on the ramp below the interstate and ahead of him is stopped, and from his position he sees what appears to be individuals dropping objects over the guardrail into the traffic underneath. He hears sirens in the distance, and he sees flashing lights on police cruisers in a couple of different directions, but no apparent police presence right at the incident site. The participant now is able to divert onto another ramp, which takes him onto the surface streets a little bit to the east of the scene we were looking at a minute ago. And on that surface street, he's able to get across the interstate ahead on an overpass, avoiding that crowd. And he drops down into the service streets in the University District. And in the slide that you see now, you see what he confronts then, which is that the large mass of people flowing towards the convention site are on the interstate, which you see in the lower right-hand corner of this image. But there are groups of people also moving in that general direction on parallel streets and flowing across parking lots and sidewalks, all of them moving in that general direction. And again, where he is now, as shown by the blue arrow, there's no police presence available. In the middle of the block, in front of the YMCA, the brown building in the middle of the screen, is where things turn ugly. A group of 20 to 30 individuals enter the street, forcing the car in front of our president to stop. The protesters are loud and rowdy. They're shouting and gesticulating at the driver, who appears to shout back in response to them. And a chunk of asphalt is thrown through the windshield of that car in front, and before our individual can process the rapidly changing situation, the driver of the car in front of him is pulled out of the car, thrown to the ground, and assaulted by a couple of the group of protesters in the street. His own car is blocked by the action in front of him, and by another car that is stopped close behind him, and by cars also stopping in the lane immediately to his left. So there's no way for him to get his car away from this scene. He steps out of the car, and shouts to the now three young men that are kicking the other driver on the ground. Two of them turn and start towards him. He steps between the two cars as he draws his handgun and orders the individuals to stop and come no closer. When they see the weapon, they back away towards the far side of the street. But he is now gathering more and more attention from the other individuals in the street. The driver on the ground, the assault victim, struggles to his feet, moves towards him, clearly in pain. He's bleeding from superficial wounds on his scalp and face, but he's mobile. The original three the original three attackers are in the street watching, but our participant pulls the victim behind him and pushes him towards the side door of the YMCA. As they approach the door, two more individuals from the protester crowd rush forward towards these two individuals on the sidewalk. One throws another chunk of asphalt, which misses them both by a few inches, and the other has a knife in his hand. The knife wielder is less than 20 feet away, and he's running to close the distance. Our participant has no time, no alternatives, and so he chooses to shoot. He shoots once, observes the target stumble, regain his balance, and lunge to cross the remaining few feet that separate them. He reestablishes his sight picture, fires a second shot. Dodging to the side as the attacker falls to the sidewalk, he pushes the injured man through the door into the building and backs through the door behind him. He finds himself in a short hall with what appear to be offices and workrooms down the left side of the hall. He pulls the injured individual with him down the hall, enters the second office, finding that it has no exterior windows or other doors. Two administrative workers are standing at the door and retreat in front of him as he enters the room. He closes the door, puts his shoulder to a four-door file cabinet, pushes it across the front of the door to block it. He hears yelling and commotion in the hallway and in the street outside, but no one attempts to open the door. He dials 911 from one of the office phones and reports his location and circumstances to the operator, who advises him to remain where he is until police arrive. Asked how soon that will be, the 911 dispatcher cannot say. He waits almost a full hour, during which time the noise outside abates. He advises the office workers to remain in the barricaded room until police arrive, and they consent to do that. The injured driver's head wounds do not appear serious, and he's able to direct one of the workers to apply direct pressure to stop the bleeding. He checks his weapon, reloads, and holsters it. When police announce themselves in the hallway outside, he identifies himself as the person who made the call. He asks the officers what they want him to do, and they instruct him to emerge from the room. He advises them that the door is barricaded and that he will have to clear it, and that he has a holstered handgun, and asks the officers what they want him to do with the weapon. In accordance with their instructions, once the door is clear, he opens the door slowly, steps into the hall with his hands above his head. The officers move him to the wall, perform a cursory search, take his weapon, examine his ID and his carry permit, and handcuff him with an assurance that this is for their safety and his own. They advise the injured person that EMS should be arriving soon to assess his condition and treat his injuries. And the office workers in the room are asked to remain in the area until the officers are able to interview them. More officers arrive along with EMS, and a crime scene investigation begins. And now our situation concludes as we return to, in this small corner of the University District, returns to something. Now again, this is just a hypothetical narrative to set the stage for the discussion that we want now to continue with. And the question that we ask is this: what enabled the resolution of this potentially life-threatening situation with injuries only to the single attacker and some property damage out in the street? Those individual skills Mr. Danielowski is going to talk about. What we would like to say in general is that this is what we do at Pulse. We provide you with the skills and the mental preparedness to meet this kind of a crisis and resolve it successfully and safely and within the law. Mike, if you would pass.
Okay, Bill, thank you. And I will now pass this on to Ron, who will pick up the webinar from here. We have about 15 minutes to go here, folks, and then we'll get into the closing and the Q&A session. So, Ron, I'm going to give you the keyboard and mouse. Can you please confirm?
Okay, I'll let you know when it's happened for me here. Can you hear me all right, Mike?
I can. Mm-hmm.
There we go. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Bill, for the introduction. What Bill just did was gave you two historic examples of what group violence and civil arrest can look like from the historic perspective, and he also threw in a hypothetical scenario there in the end that, while hypothetical, is made up of numerous scenarios that have played themselves out numerous times. When we look at the scenario, there's a lot of things that could contribute to a satisfactory outcome. A lot of things we can really kind of point to and break down. Don't want to get into quarterbacking this thing Monday morning, quarterbacking it and talking about each of the decisions, but suffices to say that the success in that scenario and the historic scenarios, or any scenario where violence is needed, is really attributed to the confident application of individual skills learned and trained under realistic circumstances. And to kind of break that down, if you look at that first word, confidence, what it does is it equals better decision making. And the reason for this is confidence suggests some amount of comfort with your skills that do not promote you to become so excited that you start thinking irrationally. And normally, under the debilitating stress of a lethal force encounter, when one is not trained properly, what you end up with is what we call a sympathetic nervous system response, and that's just the body's natural reaction to a high-stress event. And when that happens to the body, what we tend to do at that point when we get overstressed is we do no longer think rationally with our forebrain. We think then more instinctually, reflexively with our midbrain, our mammalian animal brain, and that really doesn't equal thought. It just operates on survival instinct, and it's not good to be reactive in that stage. So the confidence of making that better decision has everything to do with the training of the individual. And that includes things like the individual skills in your gun handling, for instance. Those skills include things, obviously, like how to hold that gun to shoot it more accurately, being able to shoot that firearm more accurately with combative sighted fire or intuitive fire, clearing malfunctions out, conducting reloads, doing what it takes to keep that gun up and running is extremely important for the individual, as well as the techniques that he uses, for instance, to maybe clear a hallway, or in the case of the person in the last scenario, is knowing how to seek cover correctly, knowing how to use those parked vehicles there to his advantage, and actually having the presence of mind to be able to come up with a plan to put all these things together with his techniques, and which kind of gives us our tactics. If you look at the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see little underlined blue links there. When you get these PowerPoints in your inbox, you'll be able to click on those, and it'll take you right to specific books and resources in there. So if we have the individual skills, including the gun handling skills, our tactics, our techniques, we're familiar with our procedures, that we can use them calmly enough in a defensive scenario. The reason we can get that point is because the individual has been taught under realistic circumstances that mimic reality as close as possible. We do that through what we call reality-based training. Reality-based training is as much as what it sounds like. Reality being we don't have scenarios that are so far beyond the spectrum, having you shooting the zombie horde or invading space aliens or some other crazy stuff taken out of the movies in Hollywood. Reality-based training operates off of events that have happened in the past that we know you can, as Bill had said, the more probable a situation is and more dramatically it can impact your life are the things we're trying to train for. While that terrorist event like 9/11 would be very low on that end with very high potential payout for the adversary, the more likely scenarios for the individual would be something happening up close and personal, and that could be anything from somebody trying to take you out in a back alley and have their way with you to you ending up in the wrong place at a wrong time at a mass murder event, commonly called the active shooter event. And something like that happening is not at all far from the reality that people do face on a daily basis. So that reality and the reality-based training and decision-making is kind of key. And what we look at then in that reality-based training is being able to put people under that duress so they can see, experience for themselves what that violence looks like and what it feels like to them. And then what they do after being repeatedly exposed to these types of environments is it gives them a lot of confidence in their ability to operate within that environment, successfully operate and come to a conclusion that is beneficial to them and others. And then that's what builds that confidence that we were talking about in the previous slide. This reality-based training event also allows us to teach people to achieve what we call flipping the switch. And basically what that does is it builds in the ability to teach people how to go from Mr. Social to Mr. Asocial, somebody who is not normally accustomed to delivering violence decisively, building that into a response that the body catches on to very quickly when they realize the time for talking and negotiating are over and it's time to act decisively. The nice thing about this is teaching people how to use violence is once they have the confidence in their abilities to end a violent confrontation to their benefit quickly and effectively, it builds a great deal of confidence, and then what you end up seeing with people is that they are much more judicious in their use of that violence because, one, they understand their abilities, and now, because they know their capabilities, they start looking for alternatives they can use because they recognize the moment when that opportunity is upon them very clearly, and it allows them to have a much better decision-making process, which we also spoke about earlier. To kind of round this out, with that stress inoculation within that reality-based environment where we are enabling people to use violence, one of the key aspects here at the same time for the individual is expanding their connectivity with their environment. This can come through a number of means. We use what we call contact drills to do that, so people can start to gain situational awareness of what's going on, start making those preliminary plans. And as they expand their connectivity, not only in that instant, but throughout the day, prepping up to that, it's finding friends who they feel the same way about their security and the potential threats out there and taking this type of thing seriously. And then actually coming up with a plan and then training themselves to defend their immediate surroundings for each other. It could be yourself, your significant other, your brothers, your sisters, your best friends. It could be a workmate. It could be administrators at school you're familiar with. It could be business partners. It could be a number of people that co-locate where you are throughout your community, all the way up to churches, schools, and the community itself. And you see bits and pieces and examples of this throughout Bill's discussion on the previous scenarios. Which then brings us to the intent defend, which is really expanding our connectivity with our environment and our network in our local area with our law enforcement, with our first responders, to help start smoothing operations between yourself, your businesses, your churches, your schools, your communities, to defend yourselves. And these types of training events are already happening throughout the United States. Colleges have them regularly, the ones that take this seriously, as do schools. And so what it's learning how to do is plugging into that network that's available to you now and making that transition easier. And to close out my portion, what I'll do at this point is turn this back over to Bill Talon, who will talk to you a little bit about our Intent to Defend package.
Our Intent to Defend protocol is an effort that we have made to address a subtopic that many trainers in this field do not. And you can see from that hypothetical scenario that I presented a minute ago that we spent some time talking about what happens after the trigger is pulled. And in a domestic peacetime environment, if you find yourself in a shooting situation, your challenges and the danger does not end at the moment that you successfully resolve the situation. When shots are fired, we do presume, hopefully not too optimistically, that there will be a law enforcement response. What we do in the Intent to Defend at some length, as you'll see, because we'll provide you with this document, we talk about that denouement, that aftermath of a shooting situation, and how armed citizens and private defenders must be prepared to interact safely and link up safely with responding law enforcement. From the perspective of today's scenario, where we're speaking of one person acting on his own, this boils down to something that's fairly simple conceptually, and that is you must be able to look at the situation from the perspective of an arriving law enforcement officer who comes into a situation with very limited information. He knows shots have been fired, people are injured. When he arrives on scene, any armed individual he sees is going to be a suspect and may very well be perceived as a direct lethal threat to the officer. So we talk in our protocol at some length about the actions that a citizen can take to reassure that officer that he is not in immediate danger and that this person is not a threat and does not need to be addressed with violence himself. So we provide those kinds of instructions and we train those scenarios in the course of our reality-based training, because it would be the worst of tragedies to fight your way through a lethal threat and then find yourself in a confrontation with law enforcement, no matter how that works out. So, Mike, back to you.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Ron. I will now wrap up here. I have a couple of quick closing comments to make. First off, everybody on the call today will get a free 2-week trial in the O2DA Defense Academy. I will take you on a very quick tour in just 1 second here to show you what that looks like and how you can gain access to it. Then you will also get PDF versions of the strategy manual from which the topics are selected, and the Intent to Defend protocol. So both of those PDF copies will be available to you, and there will be a web link that will be provided to you via an email that will contain your trial credentials and other information after the webinar is complete. That follow-up email you will get sometime tomorrow morning. Everything that we've talked about today is inside of our O2DA Defense Academy, which is the hub for all of our training resources. This is a site that has a monthly subscription